Spring of 1945. The battles of World War II in the Pacific were still raging. On the island of Luzon in the Philippines, American and Japanese forces were locked in fierce combat. Fighting here was completely different from battles across the open fields of Europe. Mountains, dense vegetation, narrow trails, hidden defensive positions. Japanese forces used the natural terrain to create extremely difficult defensive positions. American soldiers continued advancing, but every few meters could become a matter of life and death. One of the units fighting in the area was the 127th Infantry Regiment of the 32nd Infantry Division. Among them was 21-year-old Private First Class David M. Gonzalez. He had been born in California. He had joined the U.S. Army in 1944. A year later, he would find himself in the middle of one of the most terrifying moments of his life. On April 25, 1945, Gonzalez and his unit were fighting near Hill 507 along the Villa Verde Trail. Enemy fire was intense. The soldiers could barely move across exposed ground. Moving from one position to another could take only a few seconds, yet those seconds could determine whether someone lived or died. Japanese machine guns and snipers watched the area. American soldiers remained behind their positions, waiting for an opportunity to advance. Then something unexpected happened. A 500-pound bomb struck near the American position. The explosion shook the entire hillside. Dirt, rocks, and debris were thrown into the air. Within seconds, the place where the soldiers had been was buried beneath a massive mound of earth. And underneath that mound, 5 American soldiers were trapped alive. For a few seconds after the explosion, everything seemed strangely quiet. But the silence was deceptive. 5 men were still alive beneath the earth. They could feel the weight of dirt and rocks pressing down around them. Their connection with the outside world had disappeared. No light, almost no space, almost no ability to move. And the most terrifying part was that enemy fire was still coming down around them. They could not escape on their own. The soldiers above ground understood what had happened. The trapped men needed help. That was when David Gonzalez acted without waiting for an order. He grabbed his entrenching tool, a small military shovel, and moved toward the buried soldiers. But getting there was almost as dangerous as remaining under the earth. Gonzalez had to crawl roughly 15 yards across exposed ground. Enemy bullets were flying overhead. Rounds struck the dirt around him, but he did not stop. When he reached the buried soldiers, their commander was also attempting to rescue them. The 2 men began digging together. Then tragedy struck. Enemy machine gun fire hit the commander. He was killed there on the battlefield. Now Gonzalez was alone. 5 men were still beneath the earth. Enemy machine guns and snipers surrounded the area. Gonzalez knew he could be killed at any moment, but he continued digging. Gonzalez began clearing the earth with his shovel. The ground was hard. Rocks mixed with dirt slowed him down. At times he had to use his hands. Enemy fire continued passing dangerously close to him. If he stayed low while digging, he would be harder to see. But there was another problem. He could not dig quickly enough, and every second mattered for the men trapped beneath him. So he made an extremely dangerous decision. He stood up. That made him much easier for the enemy to see, but digging while standing allowed him to work faster. He accepted the risk. He drove the shovel back into the earth. After several minutes, his hands reached a human body. He had found the first soldier. Gonzalez began pulling him through the dirt. Finally, the first man was free. But the work was not finished. 4 men remained. Gonzalez went straight back to the mound. He did not stop to rest. He did not stop to protect himself. He simply kept digging. Enemy fire continued around him. After freeing the first man, he now knew for certain that the others were still alive. He continued removing the earth covering the second soldier. Slowly, another body appeared. Another American soldier was still alive. Gonzalez pulled him out of the collapsed earth. 2 of the 5 men had now been rescued. But Gonzalez immediately turned toward the third soldier. The enemy had not stopped firing. Machine gun rounds continued striking the ground around him. Snipers could target any movement. Gonzalez nevertheless continued digging toward the third trapped soldier. The dirt and rocks above the man were heavy. Every shovel full of earth represented only a tiny step forward. But time was running out. Again, Gonzalez exposed himself by standing and digging. He knew he had to work faster. He was placing his own life in even greater danger. Finally, part of the third soldier became visible. Gonzalez continued digging. Another movement. Another shovel full of earth. Then the third soldier was finally pulled from beneath the ground. 3 men were alive. But at that exact moment, Gonzalez himself was hit by enemy fire. The bullet struck Gonzalez, leaving him mortally wounded. Only moments earlier, he had been digging through the earth to save other men. Now he was the one who needed help. But the most important part of his mission had already been accomplished. The soldiers he had rescued were evacuated to safety. Gonzalez died from his wounds that same day. He was only 21 years old. He had been in the army for just over a year. He would never return home. He would never see his family again. But his final actions helped save the lives of several other soldiers. This is perhaps the hardest part of the story. 5 men had been buried beneath the earth. Gonzalez went toward them while enemy fire was still falling. Their commander was killed during the rescue attempt. Gonzalez continued alone. He personally helped free 3 of the trapped men. Then he was mortally wounded. The remaining 2 soldiers were also rescued afterward. His actions therefore gave several men a chance to survive. This was more than simple courage. It was one human being placing the lives of others before his own. David M. Gonzalez died on April 25, 1945, on Luzon. But his story did not end there. Later that year, his bravery was recognized with the United States' highest military decoration, the Medal of Honor. The award was presented posthumously. In December 1945, the medal was presented to his family. Gonzalez was no longer alive to receive it. He could not stand on a stage. He could not tell the story himself. Instead, his family stood in his place. The final actions of a 21-year-old soldier had become part of American military history. When people hear this story, one question naturally comes to mind. Why did he go? He could have stayed behind like everyone else. Nobody could have guaranteed his safety. Nobody could have promised him a medal. He saw how dangerous the situation was. He had just watched his commander die. Yet he still did not turn back. He picked up his shovel. He crawled toward the buried soldiers. And he began digging. There was no medal waiting for him. No fame. No camera. Nobody was standing there recording his actions for history. He simply saw men who were still alive beneath the earth. And he went to them. When we talk about war, we often remember the great battles. Generals, tanks, and military operations. But sometimes history is shaped by one person's decision made in only a few minutes. David Gonzalez was not thinking about victory that day. He was not thinking about the end of the war. He was not thinking about a medal. He was thinking about whether 3 men would live. And he was willing to risk everything for them. That is why his story is not only about soldiers buried alive. It is about how far one person can go for another human being. On April 25, 1945, 5 men were buried beneath the earth on a Philippine battlefield. 3 were pulled out alive by David M. Gonzalez. The man who helped save them never made it home. His name was David M. Gonzalez. He was 21 years old, and the final act of his life would survive long after he was gone.